Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We are so happy that you chose to spend this time with us, and we are looking forward to an exciting conversation. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stephens, who I met when you were 16 years old, 2 years ago. Good to see you after all this time. And thank you so much, Simon. I appreciate everybody for joining us today. We have some very important information to talk about. But as I was putting together slides to talk about today, I was listening to a sermon by Bishop Noel Jones, and I'll share some of those with you, but my mood is a bit dampened today that a good friend of mine and past president of the National Medical Association died this morning. And she was a specialist in cancer, world-renowned. She's a two-star Air Force general.
No.
And she was found dead this morning. We don't know the cause or anything, but it lets me know again that we're all very mortal, and we have to do the best we can to take care of ourselves. And we want to talk about some of those things in objective terms and subjectivity. So we pray that her soul is in God's hands. Simon, let's do the first slide, please. And Barbara, you may help me as we go through these slides in case my vision isn't all that good and you always have comments.
I'll be good.
You're good. Okay. So the title of this is Be Your Own Best Friend. And one of the first famous sayings of the lady physician who passed, and she was an Air Force pilot, a general officer, but she used to say True North. And that was the title of her presidency. Next slide. And from the sermon I got, are you going to be a glider or a 747? Well, I noted that Dr. Neighbor-Stephens correctly said we don't know about Boeing right now with all of the mistakes it's been making. But interestingly enough about Boeing, these crazy right-wingers are saying that it's because of diversity, equity, and inclusion that leads Boeing to be a less astute company. So this is the world we're living in right now. But if you want to fly, you need to be jet propelled if you want to defy inertia and gravity. Next slide. So who do you love? In the Bible, it says you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the first law of nature is self-preservation. So you should be or become an expert about everything that is you. You encompasses your family, meaning your spouse, your kids, your grandkids. Take charge of your life force and body. I have two experiences in the past 2 weeks I've been dealing with. I had a cousin. I have a cousin who's in Maryland who was told that she had kidney failure from diabetes and had to go to Iowa to get a kidney and pancreatic transplant. But she couldn't find her doctor to talk to, and I couldn't find him to talk to. So she had no relationship with him. And one, you don't have to go to Iowa for a kidney transplant. I don't know why you want to go to Iowa anyway. But no communication. Another person referred to me whose daughter had lupus and kidney failure. And her doctor was, I located a doctor in Argentina, and she couldn't get the drug that she needed to knock back her lupus, so she had no personal relationship. And he's a very well-known celebrity. I won't name, but Stairway to Heaven is in his repertoire. Next slide. So we want to talk about laboratory and meals. You need your own primary care physician or health provider. And as a famous Dr. Wilbur Jordan used to tell us all the time, you need a primary care provider, physician. Now, we can all go to a nephrologist, a cardiologist, an endocrinologist, and they can be primary care for you, but you need to have somebody who is related to you in terms of what they believe, what they think, that you trust them, and they care about you. There needs to be bilateral respect, trust, and caring. And to use Dr. Neighbor's saying that she's adopted, use common sense. And I added mother wit. And when you pick somebody to be your physician or healthcare provider, and many women I know, they have only the doctor they have is an OBGYN doctor. And that's okay if that doctor is willing to be your primary care doctor, but you need a doctor who will look at every part of you. Next slide. So this is a new year. And at the beginning of the year, I'm going to suggest that you take charge of your own health, and there are certain tests you may be required to address your risk. And you want a doctor or a healthcare provider who can look at everything about your body at the beginning of the year. And the beginning of the year is at least the first quarter. I want everybody to consider getting a complete blood count. That will tell you if you're anemic, will tell you potentially if you have increased white cells, which might mean you might be infected, have other things wrong with you, but a complete blood count, that's a CBC. I also want you to make sure you have ordered for you a comprehensive metabolic panel. That includes all the electrolytes, liver function panels, and everything about your body. And we can tell a lot of things just by looking at the CBC and the comprehensive metabolic panel. Also, make sure that you get a urine analysis. That's very important. If there's protein in the urine, they should do something called an ACR, an albumin to creatinine ratio. And from that, we can tell the status of your kidneys from looking at what that ratio is. So these are things that you need to make sure that your doctor or provider orders for you at a minimum. Next slide. I also want you to request a lipid profile. And that looks at your total cholesterol, your low density lipoprotein cholesterol, which is called an LDL-C, high density lipoprotein, which is HDL-C, triglycerides, and get a fasting lipid profile if you can. But if you can't get that, get a non-fasting lipid profile. Now, in addition to that type of lipid profile, there are certain people genetically who have family histories of high cholesterol, have family histories of stroke, family histories of things that are plaque, atherosclerosis, and for those people, they should have a little piece that test, but that is what your provider will order for you if that's needed. Liver function tests are important. The alanine aminotransferase, or the ALT, aspartate, or the AST. And that's especially important with diabetics because liver disease is emerging as one of the major risk factors of diabetes. And of course, I'm a nephrologist, so I want you to get liver function tests. I want you to know your serum creatinine, your estimated glomerular filtration rate, and those are very important. A lot of men will come in, I say, what medicine are you taking? They don't know. I said, what kind of car you drive? Well, I drive a Buick 225, and the compression is this, and the leather seats in the back. They know everything about that car, but they don't put the same amount of work into knowing about the workings of their own body. It is time to take charge of what you know about yourself. It's good to have a physician, but don't leave it to the physician to know about your body. Know about your own body, yourself, and your family. Next slide. So we've said this many times before, that in the United States, cardiovascular disease, or CVD, is the leading cause of death. In the year 2021, approximately 695,000 deaths were attributed to CV disease. We know diet is a significant risk factor for that disease. And we know that modern day practices, such as missing morning meals, eating late at night, they may have an effect on your nutritional health. In an effort to understand the relationship between meals, there was a study done, and they looked at associations between first and last meal times, how much time between meals and fasting, in other words, how long you slept at night, and was there any relationship between cardiovascular risk factors? Next slide. So delayed meals are tied to increased cardiovascular risk. So beyond the nutritional quality of the diet, and the timing of the meal is very important. And if you eat late, don't eat breakfast, eat late at night, those are associated with increased risk for cardiovascular disease, especially in women. And there's a result of a large study suggested this. Next slide. So the researchers assessed the association between time of the first meal of the day, such as before 8 o'clock, between 8 and 9 p.m., after 9 a.m., and after 9 a.m., and the last meal before 8 p.m. and after 9 p.m. And the number of meal eating occasions didn't seem to have an effect. The duration of how much you fast at night, whether it's 12 hours, 8 hours, or whatnot, and they looked at the risk factors. So during a median follow-up of 7.2 years, there's 2,036 cases of overall cardiovascular disease. There were 988 cases of cerebral vascular disease, such as stroke, TIA, which is a transient ischemic attack. And there are over 1,000 cases of coronary heart disease, myocardial infarction, were reported based upon the way people ate and when they ate. Next slide. So each additional hour, delaying the time of the first meal of the day, was associated with a higher risk for overall cardiovascular disease, with association stronger in women than in men. I don't know why that is, but maybe some of our people on the line can help us with that. Each additional hour in delaying the time of the last meal was associated with an increased risk for cerebral vascular disease. So the later you eat, the more risk there is for brain disease, brain problems. So the last meal after 9 p.m. was associated with a 28% higher risk than a meal before 8 p.m. What does that tell you? You can't have late night snacks. I remember this character in the cartoons named Dagwood, who would always have a midnight snack of a triple, quadruple decker sandwich. But there was no association between the number of eating occasions in the study. Next slide. So these results do suggest a potential benefit of adopting earlier eating patterns, and a coupling of longer nighttime fasting. So you need to get your sleep, not get up and eat, and don't skip breakfast. That's very important to decrease your risk. Next slide. So what are the things you should eat? Well, we encourage, and let me give a disclaimer here. Everybody should have their own primary care physician that helps them to create their diet and eating habits. We here on the Black Health Trust, we have suggestions, but these are for your study and advice only, but we're not giving you personal advice because we don't know your body. But your physician should. And even though you want your physician or provider to know your body, you want to do your own study so you know and can have an intelligent conversation with that person, whether they be physician, nurse practitioner, specialist or not. But we encourage adherence to diets that emphasize high intakes of vegetables, fruits, nuts, whole grains, lean vegetables, or animal protein and fish. Diets should minimize the intake of trans fats and meals processed with red meat. We don't want red meat. We want you to eat no refined carbohydrates and less sweetened beverages, which is my weakness. The European Society of Cardiology guidelines make a recommendation for a Mediterranean diet or a similar diet to reduce cardiovascular risk. Further, they suggest replacing saturated with unsaturated fats and reducing intake. So make sure you choose a plant-based diet, eat mostly that, and eat mostly fatty fish. That includes salmon, sardines, and cold water fish. Next slide. Don't forget the sardines. But overnutrition is also an issue. It may lead to overweight, and we've talked about obesity. And that's the single most important dietary factor that's going on right now. And that is associated with a lot of poor health outcomes. It's associated with the premature mortality, that is death, as well as increased incidence of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, and other important conditions. One of my favorite patients who's perfectly healthy except for weighing 385 pounds, and now she had breast cancer related purely to that obesity. Whatever dietary pattern you follow, a maintenance of energy balance is an important overall goal. So you want to avoid weight gain if you can, and even if the patient is overweight, obesity is very important that we advise them to get rid of that weight. But you have to balance what you take in with what you expend in terms of energy. Next slide. So total energy expenditure for recommended daily caloric intake is based upon age, sex, and weight and activity level. And we recommend exercising at least 150 minutes per week. That's about 30 minutes per day. And this is not walking at work, but this is walking devoted to your body and your mind. It's also good for your mind and spirituality to walk quietly or even talking with somebody, but not in a shopping center and not around your office. So there are ways and there are calculators available on the internet that tell you how to calculate how much you need in terms of calories. And you're going to ask your doctor also to provide you with that. Next slide. So there are new dietary guidelines put out by the ADA and all the big medical associations, and they recommend certain dietary patterns. So there's specific dietary guidelines that may vary, but in general, high quality, healthy diet emphasizes limited consumption of red and processed meats, unhealthy fats such as saturated fats. Somebody asked me the other day about lard. Lard has never been good. There's nothing about lard that is good. Alcohol is not good for you. And of course, nobody should smoke And we do ask you to increase your fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts, and whole grains. Next slide. So we talk often about something called a Mediterranean diet. Some of us recommend a DASH diet, but a Mediterranean diet, there's no single definition. But a Mediterranean diet is typically high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. This diet usually includes olive oil as an important source of monounsaturated fat and is always low to moderate use of wine allowed. That's good, especially red wine. In general, it includes low to moderate amounts of fish, poultry, and dairy products, and it includes a little red meat, like the size of your palm. Although the Mediterranean diet is associated with several health things and benefits, it remains uncertain if there's any one component of the Mediterranean diet that is responsible for its benefit. It may be the whole gamish of the Mediterranean diet that is good for you and not just one single item in it. Next slide. In a network meta-analysis, this is over time, of 40 different trials comparing 7 dietary patterns among 35,548 patients at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. A Mediterranean diet with over 12 trials resulted in lower risk of several outcomes, including all-cause mortality, where the hazard ratio was 0.72 of cardiovascular mortality, a decrease in stroke, and a decrease in non-fatal myocardial infarction. Next slide. In an observational study, a Mediterranean diet has been associated with a lower overall mortality and cardiovascular mortality, a decreased incidence of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and cancers, including colorectal cancer, prostate, aerodigestive, oropharyngeal cancer, and breast cancer. Next slide. So diabetes is one of the most common chronic health conditions seen by U.S. healthcare professionals now. But care begins with screening for diabetes and making the right diagnosis. The diagnostic criteria usually gives way to a fasting blood glucose level, a glycolated hemoglobin level, known as hemoglobin A1C, or a 2-hour fasting glucose tolerance test orally. But the new guidelines say mostly gives way to hemoglobin A1C. But if you can't get the A1C, you still want the oral glucose test, but you want to make sure you diagnose that diabetes as early as possible. Next slide. So A1C may not be accurate in everybody, especially with persons with hemoglobin variants, sickle cell disease, if women are pregnant, second, third trimesters, and in the postpartum period, you may not be able to get an A1C that's accurate, so you have to get the blood sugar. Also, patients that have lost blood, patients that have HIV, are receiving hemodialysis, the A1C may not be the best or only measurement you should take. So make sure you talk to your physician about that. Next slide. So continuing with the screening of diabetes, in the absence of clear symptoms of diabetes, you want to document what's going on with a random plasma glucose. If it's greater than 200, the diagnosis of diabetes should be confirmed by a second test. You might want to mix the test with the hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose, and do as much as you can. And if it's still not giving you what you need in terms of the result you can count on, repeat that in somewhere between 3 and 6 months. I have so many patients that I order lab before I see them, and they still think a lab is not that important. It is very important for that doctor to see. Next slide. So another risk factor for diabetes is asymptomatic heart failure. So it's very important to screen a person that you've diagnosed with diabetes, even if they have no symptoms, to do an EKG. You also want to measure natriuretic peptide. Your physician has to do that for you. You also may want to do an echocardiogram. That's really important because many asymptomatic people are moving towards complicated heart failure. Make sure you get these tests and your physician doesn't just wave you off. You want to be worked up for everything, especially if you're a diabetic. Next slide. So another complication of older people, but even people with diabetes especially, and so there's a strong recommendation for looking at PAD. That's called peripheral arterial disease. And you test that with something called an ankle brachial index. It's a machine, they put cuffs on your arms and cuffs on your ankles, and they look at how that ankle brachial index is, because you don't want to have an amputation. There's a high incidence of amputation of limbs in blacks, higher than in whites. And that ankle brachial index is something very important, peripheral arterial disease. It's very important to go to somebody who does the test and not just looking to cut off your leg or do an operation, but it's very important not to get an amputation if you don't have to. Next slide. So we always think about type 2 diabetes, but type 1 is something that we find that even adults are being diagnosed with later in life. And the only way to diagnose that now is to look at certain hormones in the body. And your physician can have those bloods drawn, and that looks at the type 1, thinking of how you can treat that later. And this is more specialty than we're going to go into on this, but make sure you get screened for that. And there are some new medications which may treat this disease. There's a difference in type 1 diabetes and type 2. And type 1 is inherited, and there may be a genetic component that can be addressed with some of these new drugs. Next slide. Obesity management. We won't spend much time on that now, but obesity should be looked at not only with the typical BMI, basal metabolic index, but also we want people to have a waist circumference and waist to hip ratio. And this is very important. Your waist, if you're a woman, should be less than 35 inches. If you're a man, should be less than 40 inches. That waist to hip ratio is very important in looking at that. You can be shaped like a pear and not have the same risk if you're shaped like an apple. Next slide. We've talked about vitamins before, and vitamins are good. I take a prenatal vitamin as often as I can, usually every day. But vitamins have their risks. There is no established risk that a multivitamin will take care of. So you can take them, but they have not proven a benefit of taking vitamins. But we have recommended taking vitamin D and vitamin C. But you need to, again, check with your healthcare provider what is the right vitamin for you. I don't think there's much risk in taking a good quality multivitamin or prenatal vitamin. But again, make sure that you check with your healthcare provider of what would be of benefit to you. Next slide. Looking at some of these things, fat soluble vitamins such as A, D, F, and K are generally more toxic than water soluble vitamins. So vitamin D might cause hypercalcemia, high calcium at doses as low as 4,000 units. And sometimes I've recommended 5,000 units, but again, these are for patients that I know, and during the pandemic, that was something that was very important. But again, you want to get your doses in line with what your physician thinks for you. And some people, vitamin A, especially in pregnancy, can be teratogenic or can make deformities in babies. We'll ask Dr. Nabert about that in a few minutes. Well, also, the beta carotene appears to increase the risk of lung cancer in adults who are at high risk because of smoking or asbestos exposure. Next slide. So go to the next slide. That it? Okay. I think that's enough to discuss, but those are things I want you to take concern of, taking care of your body, and make sure you go to the lab and get the tests so your physician or provider can evaluate the status of your health. And you need to do that in the first quarter of this year. That's January, February, or March. You need to do that. And you need to have a copy of your labs, and you need to talk about them. Take a copy home, put a copy on your phone or your computer, and be prepared to discuss with your doctor what those values mean. What risk factors do you have, if any, and what should you do? You should know about your kids as well, and your family, your spouse, and your parents if you're taking care of them. Everybody should know more about themselves and help that physician who cares about you to take care of you. Thank you very much for your attention. Dr. Neighbor?
Thank you, Dr. Maxey. I think that the message, if we were going to boil it down, is take control. And we here at Black Health Trust have consistently been trying to equip you with the information and the questions that you need to ask when you are having your encounters with your primary care doctors. And I hope that by going over these periodically, that we are getting the message through. But what I don't know, but what I hope is that you know that we are always interested in entertaining your questions. And I don't see that we have gotten any question about this, but there was a report this week of a study report that actually did seem to link multivitamin the taking of multivitamins and impact on dementia. And I noticed that Dr. Lawson had put something in the chat, but I did want to make that comment in case anyone had heard it in the news, that there was a study this week that did start to the link between multivitamin taking and prevention of dementia. Let me be accurate. It wasn't that, you already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and you start taking multivitamins. It was to take multivitamins to prevent the onset of Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. But
Is Dr. Lawson on?
Yeah, he's putting comments in the chat. I'm sure he's going to respond. But it's early yet, but there has been stuff in the news.
Dr. Lawson?
Yeah, you mute on. Am I muted or unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Good. Just want to know two things. One is, thank you for your excellent statement about the risk factors and what we should be talking about. There's a very nice study that's replicated actually a bunch of other studies that's showing that, in fact, people who take multivitamins, it seems to prevent dementia. The idea that dementia is mostly genetic is simply wrong. 50% of the variance is coming from modifiable events, much less many of the other events that you described. And I also wanted to always note that now most primary care doctors are now doing is screen for psychological problems. Worrying and being depressed, people who worry and being depressed and anxious a lot do not live as long as everyone else. And it's been long known that depression is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease as well as diabetes. So screening for those, making sure you can make the life changes so that you're not consumed by depression or by post-traumatic stress disorder, which is common in African Americans, is also important for your physical health as well as your psychological health.
Excellent. Excellent. You're always on time, Doctor.
Dr. Maxey, I wanted to ask you to spend a little time on blood pressure, on high blood pressure. And it's not one of those, it's a silent disease until it's too late sometimes. So
Yeah.
I do think you need to speak a minute on high blood
Yeah.
pressure.
And actually, I've talked to some of our viewers on about high blood pressure this week. And a lot of us are undertreated with blood pressure medications. And let me talk about that for a minute. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Neighbor-Steven. That many of us are given small doses of drugs like losartan or ACE inhibitors, and more because the doctor might be afraid to give you too much. But in reality, those of us who treat patients with these drugs need to take the drug in the recommended amount and to the maximum effect of drugs. Like if you're taking 2.5 milligrams of losartan, that's not doing anything but making the devil mad. You need to be taking 100 milligrams per day of losartan, and this is another contraindication. You need to be taking an adequate dose of amlodipine. So you need to be on the maximum effect of that dose. These drugs are calculated to work at a certain level. You need to be taken once a day. If your blood pressure is 165 over 95, that is too high. Studies have shown that your pressure should be lower than 120 over 80. And for amounts over that amount, there's an increased risk of heart disease, cardiovascular disease, strokes, etc., by as much as 65%. So it's very important to control that blood pressure. And we know that blood pressure is variable, and your emotions, your activities during the day affect your blood pressure. So it won't always just be a straight line. It'll go up and down. So when you're in a good mood, it may be 115 over 80. If you're upset, it may get to 155 over 95. That's too high. That means you're not well controlled on your medication. So I always try to, when a patient comes in, I'll take their blood pressure resting and sitting, and then I'll have them walk or run in place for a minute or 2 minutes. And I will then repeat the blood pressure. If that blood pressure goes up more than 15 millimeters of mercury, I consider them not well controlled. I don't know if Dr. Richard Williams is on the call or not, but if he is, he's somebody who's an expert at this, and I'd invite his opinion on that as well. So it's very important to have your blood pressure as low as possible. I was told that if you can walk across the room, there's no such thing as low blood pressure. As long as you don't get up and fall down, the lower your blood pressure is, consistent with longer life. I hope that answers some of your issues, Dr. Neighbor-Steven.
And based on one of the comments in the chat, you might want to give a summary statement on what preventive tests we need to get. Specifically, the question is, what tests should we be getting to check for cardiovascular disease?
Okay, the test I'm wanting everybody to get are the lab tests that we talked about. And the lab tests, can you put that slide back up, Simon? Okay, so there's certain chemical lab tests we want you to get, and all of them are important. And we want you to have the other tests, an electrocardiogram, where they put the wires on your arms, chest, and legs that measures the electrical output of your heart. And a lot of things you can diagnose from that. Not only hypertension has an effect on it, high potassium has an effect, potassium has an effect. So those are the things that you want to look at. And we also want you to look at an echocardiogram, a 2D echocardiogram, which looks at the wall motion of your heart and can tell how thick the walls are. And this slide talks about the lipid profile. That's very important. We want to know about the low density lipoprotein, or the LDL lipoprotein. That's very important. That level be less than 100, preferably less than 50 is the best. And even when people have one that's above that, we want to get the test for little p, little a test, to look at one of the subgroups of lipoproteins if you have family risk. Triglycerides are important. And the high density lipoprotein tells me if you exercise in that tends to go up with exercise. If you come in with an HDL of 40, I know you haven't walked in a year. So we want to look at those sets. We also want you to look at the urine test. It's very important because if you pee in the toilet and you see bubbles or foam, that suggests you have protein in your urine, and we need to have that looked at right away in terms of the albumin to creatinine ratio. So that means you have some form of chronic kidney disease, and we can probably back that up with some of the newer medications they have, like the SGL2 medications and the things that are MRAs we can treat you with. So those are things to be aware of, but you can't be aware of them if you don't take the test. And if your physician cares about you, they will automatically order those, especially if you show an interest. Make sure you and your family get tested and discuss those with your physician. And that's all I'll say on that.
Dr. Walks is with us. I don't know if you knew he was with us.
Hello, Dr. Walks.
Good afternoon. I have been here since about 4:07. My computer decided to take the day off, so I'm sitting next to it, giving it a very dirty look while I'm on my cell phone. But I've listened to your, as always, impressive presentation, Dr. Maxey. I do have a comment though, and the comment is, as a physician, so many times people will come in to see me, and whether it's depression or diabetes, they will want a diagnosis of what's going on. And then they'll want this combination, like we doctors do, of here's what I want you to do, and here's the medication I want. And I would really like if all of us who are on the Black Health Trust take your advice about the diet and the exercise. And so by the time when I go into the doctor, wouldn't it be nice if I could say to the doctor, look, I'm eating right. I'm not eating, I'm having my first meal at 7 o'clock when I wake up after 8.5 hours of sleep. My last meal, I'm eating at 7 p.m. I'm walking, not once every 4 years, but once every day or two. And so I'm doing my part, and not be so dependent on the medications. So when the lab test comes back and the lab test says, hey, we have a problem, I know I'm doing my part. And then I say, look, doctor, I'm doing my part. I'm eating, I'm drinking, I'm sleeping, all the healthy stuff. Help me with some medication to add to my effort. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but I'm so tired of folks coming in thinking that I can just write a prescription and everything is going to be fine.
I
Well,
like that comment, Dr. Walks. That's very important.
Your comment is very important. And I'd like to, because I was thinking about this before you said what you were going to say. When you do go in to see your primary care physician, or for that matter, any of your other physicians, please bring your brown bag with you. And I don't mean your brown bag of Thunderbird. Bring your brown bag of all the things that you are taking, both prescribed and non-prescribed.
Say that again. Important. Say that one again.
Please bring in your brown bag of all the medicines that you are taking, whether they are prescribed or not prescribed, because I am seeing, so that your physician won't be blindsided by problems created by whatever they may prescribe for you, because they don't know what else you're doing. So right. Please bring that bag in. Now, why is it a problem to take stuff, to go to your doctor and not share the information with your doctor about everything, every herbal, everything that you've seen advertised on TV, everything that you've heard somebody say was a good thing to do, plus whatever has been prescribed to you along the way. The reason you need to do that is because there's a problem called interaction. When you take more than one thing, you introduce the possibility of an interaction with the other thing. And that interaction may not be a good thing.
Right.
And so if you don't share what you are really doing, it can lead to some serious problems. You can have everything from passing out to prolongation of disruption of the heart rhythm, so that you have serious problems. You know, I'm so used to in my line of work, I have to write communication every day at the 5th grade level of all kinds of medical conditions. So if that was what was going on, I was about to say prolongation of QT interval, which was not at the 5th grade level. So I was trying to quickly change it to the 5th grade level. But seriously, it's very important that you tell your physician everything that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's definitely true. Any questions, any comments? I like your interest in what we're talking about. This is important.
Ms. Hall wants to know our thoughts about intermittent fasting.
Now, intermittent fasting, some people think it works, but the key things that I can bring to the table, the studies have shown that if you eat early in the morning, your first meal, and your last meal early in the afternoon or evening, those are better. Fasting, except in a religious sense, does not have the correlation with the diseases in the papers that I've seen. And I have not fasted myself. But some people complain, say that they have lost weight with fasting. That may be good. But the regularity of your meals is definitely supported by the studies that I read over the past few weeks. Intermittent fasting can help you accomplish certain things, but I'm not thinking that it has a lot of health benefits in and of itself. But I'll take a lesson on that.
One of the other things that, again, I guess coming from my pediatric background, is children watch everything that you do. And they hear a lot of what you say, but they definitely see everything that you do. And if you want them to have a healthy lifetime, you need to be mindful of the nonverbal messaging that you're giving your children in how you approach your daily health habits. It is so unfortunate for children to be in a situation where it not only it's provided to them and it's encouraged to them that they consume things that in the long run are going to come back to bite them. We have such a problem now with childhood and teenage obesity. And as I used to tell my mothers who brought in these little fat roly-poly babies, I have yet to see a baby get up and walk to the refrigerator and fix themselves a plate. So you are directly responsible for what your child is taking in.
This reminded me of the sermon I heard this morning, which suggested that the sins of the fathers are visited upon their children. And that's exactly what she's saying, that as they look at you, as they learn from you non-verbally what you do, those sins that you commit to your body, they learn as habits that they'll pass on to their children as well. How's that, Dr. Walks, for going to church?
I was at church today, Dr. Maxey, and I'll fill you in on what I thought was a very amazing sermon this morning and a useful one. Let me stay with what you and Dr. Nabrit Stevens are talking about, and maybe engage Dr. Lawson again a little bit in some of the mental health consequences of what our young people see us doing.
So why do you work Dr. Lawson so much? You poor guy.
You know what? I like to learn from smart people. And so I try to hang out with you. I try to hang out with Dr. Lawson. If I could find Dr. Neighbor Stevens, I'd hang out with her, but I'm not sure what state she's in from 1 week to the next.
I don't know if she's down there with the alligators or up
Right,
there with the
right.
Santas.
The alligators right now.
Alligators today. Yeah, I think that we, that of course, we always talk about, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're older, they won't depart from it. And Dr. Neighbor Stevens' point about and I'll say it this way because I like to say the opportunities we have to influence our young people. It is just one brief example of that I think may be useful as part of this conversation. We talk a lot about how important fathers are for their sons because you can teach your son this and teach your son that. And I was talking with somebody this week, and I said, I think fathers and men in the lives of girls is even more important. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, because what fathers and men, grandfathers and other men have an opportunity to do is we have an opportunity to teach and show our young ladies how they should be treated by a man. How do you know that a man loves you? Because he buys you a bunch of stuff, or because he takes a minute and listens to you and values your opinion and he's kind to you?
You're gonna make me say amen.
I mean, it is. I think that we miss those opportunities sometimes to pour into our young people what they should expect. And a good man might be the man with the good job that has a whole bunch of money, but the good man is the man who is willing to value your feelings, and especially with young girls, a lot of self-esteem can come from a man who pays attention to you and takes time with you and is loving toward you. And I would much rather have the young women that are in my life, my daughters and granddaughters, have a standard that is about how that man treats them than a standard that is about what that man can buy for them. So I just think that as we get into Dr. Neighbor Stevens' ballpark about how we are impacting our children, the opportunity is so wide from both a mental health place and a general physiological health space for us to really take seriously some say obligation, I'll say opportunity. Man, I want my young people in my life to be the best they can be. What an opportunity to be a part of that. So that's my sermon for today, Dr. Maxey.
I'll say amen twice. Oh, thank you so much. We're close to the top of the hour, and I want to have final words, and then I want to make an announcement of what we're going to do this week. So, Dr. Walks, you want to have another
another sermon that you I have one in me, Dr. Maxey. Absolutely. My next sermon that I have is, and this is a very practical thing. We talk a lot on Black Health Trust about what we can do to protect the health that we have. And I was talking with someone in my men's group yesterday, my church men's group, who was shoveling snow in Mississippi and talking about how rare it is. Our weather has been very challenging for a lot of places where people aren't used to ice and snow on the ground. The next time I see somebody walking with their hands in their pockets, I'm going to have to resist the urge to just push them over. Because when the ground is slick, when there's ice or snow on the ground, take your hands out of your pockets, get some cheap gloves, and prepare yourself for the chance that if you fall with your hands in your pockets and you can't break your fall, you could die, or you could absolutely damage your head or other parts of your body in a very serious way. So I just want to encourage us to think about how we can protect ourselves physically when we go out. Don't be like those people at the football game last week with no shirt on and it's 27 below zero wind chill, and then they wind up getting treated for hypothermia. That's just dumb, right? And anyway, I can go on, but recognizing your environment, recognizing the risks around you and your environment so that you can maintain the healthiest status you
Wait.
can.
I'm going to call on Dr. Steiner to comment on that cold weather activity. Dr. Walks. Dr. Steiner, is he available? And where do you live? You can tell us.
Okay, good. I think I just unmuted. Hi, Dr. Maxey and everyone else, Ivan and Barbara, et cetera. Yeah, we're down to single digits here and with a wind chill below zero and everything's at a standstill.
Mm.
And it's pretty tough, actually. You can't
So
really
y'all
go
are frozen
outside.
up. Y'all are frozen. You can't move.
Right, and we didn't vote because we're so frozen. Sorry.
Wow.
I mean, it's hard to even get the cars going, you know.
Yeah.
But this was a great lecture today. One thing I wanted to add was labels on food.
Mm.
You know, it's one thing to talk about avoiding meats and avoiding, you know, and going to more of a Mediterranean type diet. But I've been looking lately on YouTube at a fellow named Bobby. I forget his last name, but he does Costco. Just look for Bobby's review of Costco and other places, including supermarkets. And I downloaded Bobby's app, and it basically steers you away from things like saturated oils, sunflower oil, canola oil, all the bad oils, and into alternatives that don't have like loaded soybean, et cetera, in them, to things that are made with the good oils like olive oil, things like that. And I found that very, very helpful in the last few weeks. So I wanted to share that along with this lecture was great. And maybe we'll all learn to live healthier in our later years and pass it down to our kids, which is the most important.
Amen.
So
Thank you
you
very
all.
much. One of the things
Thank
that I
you.
learned about shopping, that I was told to shop around the periphery of a grocery store
Yep.
where the fresh stuff is, not on the center aisles and
Wise
all the
advice.
stuff is in packages.
Yeah.
That's something to think about.
Very
Dr.
wise advice. Yep.
Thank you. Dr. Barbara Davis-Stevens.
Well, Dr. Lawson has his hand raised. I'll yield to him because it is well past the top of the hour.
Dr. Lawson?
I just quickly note, as you already mentioned, something about the election, that we can make a difference in terms of our voting. I've been very disappointed that even though we have African American leadership in many of our major cities, they have not often addressed the problem of making sure that there's fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy foods in our African American communities. I think we really need to make a stand and let our elected officials know you can't go to a grocery store and eat healthy foods if you don't have a grocery store in your neighborhood.
Amen.
And
Well
people
said.
don't come in and kill 10 people like in Buffalo. Dr. Stevens, even though you yielded your time, you can take a minute.
Oh, my mind just went several different places. But in response to what, or not in response, but in addition to what Dr. Lawson was saying about our food deserts and stuff, I'd like to refer our audience to the archives and find the programs that we've done on community gardening. So
Yeah.
even if you don't have a backyard of your own, there may be community gardening opportunities where you live or where there are no grocery stores. That's not a total solution, but it's a start. And whether or not the big chains decide they want to open up a store in the community, you know, that's a business decision they're going to make. But then again, maybe we need to come together as a group and form our own food cooperative and open up our own stores. I mean, I believe in holding local government officials and state and federal officials accountable. No question about it.
Yeah.
Their time of judgment is at voting day. But I also know that we come from a heritage of where we did a lot for ourselves, and we need to lean on some of that mentality and philosophy that, just because we can't do it this way or get it that way, that doesn't mean that there's not another way. And just keep our eyes and ears open for the other way.
Amen.
Thank you so much. My last words, I want to speak about, I listened to another broadcast of a guy named Roland Martin, who was very well spoken about a lot of issues. And he brought forth that certain candidates for the presidency, even though their parents were immigrants and could only work at Black HBCUs and made all of their income early on the backs of Black people, that they continue to deny the fact that this country was founded on slavery and racism, and they can't speak straight about the history of the country. So we need to be careful of how we evaluate what people are in our best interest. And we know that some of the candidates out there, and one of the parties in particular, we know that they are racist and have no good intention for any of the people on this call, Black, white, or green. So we need to be very careful of who we think about. And age is something that I think we need to really evaluate, that age and good intentions are very important, but I don't think that people should be ruled out just because of their age, especially if it brings on somebody who may be 2 years younger and they're a Nazi. Next week, we're going to have a program on Wednesday night at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. And it's going to be with Dr. Charles DeShazer. And it's normally going to be for the Medical Advisory Committee, but I'm going to invite all of those who are on our mailing list to come. I sent out invitations today. If you did not get one, please send me or Simon your email. My email is randall.maxey02@gmail.com. And Simon, what's the one for Black Health Trust? Is Simon on?
It's
think it's
social
social at
at
Black-
blackhealthtrust.org.
Okay, very good. Make sure we have your email, and like you to invite the expanded edition of the presentation that we heard the Cliff Notes on last Sunday. But this one, we're going to ask him to go in depth about artificial intelligence and how it can have a necessary professional as well as economic importance to communities of color and those who work with us. So that's Wednesday the 24th at 5 o'clock 5 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern. And we expect you to join us then, if you would. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens and Dr. Walks and Simon. Have a great Sunday afternoon.
Good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.